everyone. Good morning, everyone who is joining us today to really start and discuss with a very interesting topic, which is building an effective innovation ecosystem to drive world-class innovation. My name is Dr. Sara Al-Dalal, and I'll be joining you today as the moderator for this very exciting session, which will address most of our questions that will look into bridging the gap between what is innovation ambitions, and our organizational capabilities, and how can an entity create and manage a portfolio of diverse innovation projects, and how can we strategically integrate our innovation activities so that they can produce the best results, considering the right culture with the right enablers of innovation. It is indeed with my great pleasure that I will introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Dr. Tendayi Viki, a global innovation expert and an author. Dr. Tendayi Viki is an author and innovation consultant who's helping many people around the world to change the way they establish companies to create value through innovation. He holds a PhD in psychology and as an associate partner as strategizer, where he helps large organizations to innovate for the future while managing their core businesses. He has also co-designed one of the major projects, the Pearson's product lifecycle, and an innovation from a framework that won the Best Innovation Program in 2015 at the Corporate Entrepreneur Awards in New York. Dr. Tendayi is also a great author who has 3 books based in research and consulting experience, which are Pirates in the Navy, The Corporate Startup, and The Lean Product Cycle. Dr. Tendayi Viki, we are so eager to listen, to be part of being a game changer innovator in our organization. The floor is yours, Dr. Tendayi.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor for me to be here. Dr. Sara, if you can just confirm that you can see my slides and people can hear my voice very clearly before
Thank you so much. Yes, we do hear your voice and we do see your slides clearly. Thank you so much. And I would like to encourage everyone to write their questions and answers in the Q&A box or in the chat box. And we will be having our session of answering the questions at the end of the presentation. Dr. Tendayi, let's listen and let's be a part of an effective ecosystem to drive our organization to world-class innovation. The floor is yours, Dr. Tendayi.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Tendayi Viki. I spent a lot of my time working with large organizations. At the beginning of my career, I used to work with startups and coaching startups in startup accelerator programs. But nowadays, I spend the vast majority of my time working with big organizations that already have a lot of the processes, a lot of the mechanics and how they run their organizations figured out, and then trying to figure out how do you actually innovate within such a context. Because back in 1983, Steve Jobs put up a pirate flag on top of Apple. And the point he was trying to make was that it's better to be a pirate than to join the Navy. And the reason why he was saying this was he was saying that, startups or smaller organizations are far more nimble than big government organizations or big established companies. And then I was thinking about that a little bit after I wrote my first 2 books. And so now my latest book is called Pirates in the Navy. In essence, what I'm talking about is how people who work inside established organizations like the Navy or the government organization or yourselves as a leadership council, how are you going to be able to drive core innovation or run innovation while engaging in the business of running the organizations that you already run? And I think that's an interesting conversation for all organizations to have, because even though we are where we are now, I believe that actually the one way to think about Dubai is that it was once like a startup. right? It had a scrappy culture and an innovative culture driven by innovative ideas to accomplish things the world could never think are can actually be accomplished. You need a big vision, and you need to be driven with a culture that's truly innovative to accomplish the things that have been accomplished in Dubai. But nowadays, you're a successful emirate. So you've gotten there. You're one of the best places in the world to live. Beautiful place to live, wonderful place to spend time. So this is a success story. And what I love about the session we're having today, and I want to pay you a significant compliment for making these moves you're making, designing the programs you're running, because when a lot of organizations, a lot of institutions get to the level of success that you've accomplished, what they tend to do is they tend to become complacent. And then they tend to just enjoy the benefits of the success and then not think a lot about the future because they're enjoying or exploiting their current success. But what you're doing is something that's really important, because one of the major thought leaders in innovation, his name is Scott D. Anthony, presents this argument where he says, what you want to do as an organization, a government department, a nonprofit, a large business, you want to actually innovate before you need to. You want to do it before it's necessary, because the urgency to innovate and the ability to innovate are actually inversely related. They're not related in the same way. Because when you're under pressure, when you're on a burning platform, you don't have the bandwidth or the resources to innovate. But when you're successful and you're generating a lot of income, a lot of revenue, and you have a lot of resources, that is the time to drive innovation. That is the time to take advantage of the advantages that you already have as a successful institution, as a successful emirate, as a successful government department. That's the time to innovate. Do it before you need to. Because the moment you start to feel the urgency to do it, your capability to do it actually starts to diminish. So the move you're making right now, the conversations you're having, the programs you're designing, I would encourage you to stick with it and move from being complacent to having a different hashtag for yourselves, which is hashtag uncomplacent. I think this is a fundamental way to think about the progress that you're making in just starting this conversation. So now that we've started the conversation, the question becomes then, well, what are we actually talking about? What is the conversation about? To my mind, when an established organization is talking about being innovative, what they're really asking is, how do we become ambidextrous, which is, how do we do two things at the same time? How do we optimize and improve the current models and processes we use to run our institutions? And then how do we explore future opportunities and options, right? So those are two things that we need to do at the same time. And that's what we mean by being ambidextrous, an ambidextrous organization and an ambidextrous leader. And what we know from our experience is that the best way to do this is to understand that optimizing and improving, let me use a different color here, optimizing and improving and exploring the future are completely different worlds that require different behaviors and ways of thinking. And so one way to think about this is to think about this as lying along a continuum that goes from exploring to exploiting. This is a distinction from Professor James March, who used to be a business professor at Stanford. And he talks about like the core challenges facing most established organizations is, how do you exploit your current success, take advantage of it, enjoy your current success, while at the same time exploring future opportunities. And across this spectrum, you can think about it as having maybe three different types of innovation, right? The first one is incremental innovation, which is focused on the core ways that your institutions run, the services you provide, the impact you're already having, and how to improve those processes in existing services and refine your systems. And then on the explore side, which is right at the other edge, you can have what we call radical innovations, transformative innovations, which is new transformative services, things you've not yet done before, systems, processes, services that disrupt your sector, new ways of thinking about the services that you're delivering to your stakeholders. And then, of course, in between that, you can have what we might call adjacent or sustaining innovations. And these are kind of, they take advantage of the basic stuff that you have in your core business, and then you sort of just replace and extend these processes and services. Maybe start services you're currently providing to some stakeholders, you start providing them to new stakeholders, finding new channels to deliver these services to your stakeholders. So when people ask me the question of what is the big struggle that organizations have when they're trying to drive innovation within their organizations, well, the challenge of being ambidextrous is understanding that what got you here won't get you there. So the biggest mistake organizations make is they take the processes that they used to run and manage their core services and existing services and systems, and they take those same practices and they apply them to how they explore the future. That is the biggest challenge. And understanding that you need to be world-class at running your core, the core things that you're doing and exploring the future, this is a real fundamental challenge for most organizations. So what I'd like you to do now is to grab your phone. You can scan this QR code. Or you can go to menti.com and you can type 54522091 as the code. So you can scan the QR or go to menti.com. And the question we're asking on the Menti is, which words characterize exploration as different from exploit? What are the words that actually characterize exploration as different from exploit? So let's go to the Menti itself and see how many people are joining. So I can see 3 people here. You can choose up to 3 options. 3 of them are correct, 3 of the answers are wrong. So you can choose up to 3 options. And I can see, remember what we're looking for is words that are unique to exploration, right? And not words that define exploitation. The words that are explore words, which words here characterize exploration? And I can see the responses are coming in. We'll leave the poll up for a few more seconds. Thank you very much for participating. Fascinating. All right, I can see responses have stopped coming in. You can see here that the vast majority of people are choosing risk-taking as the key characteristic that defines exploration. So I'm going to stop the poll now and press enter to show you the correct answer. And the correct answer is, the correct answers are, there we go. So you can see here that uncertainty, risk-taking, and searching are the 3 correct answers here. When you're exploring, you don't have predictability. So that's definitely not the correct answer because you're exploring the future. When you're exploring, you can't really have efficiency because you're not optimizing something that's already existing. So it's exploration. And when you're exploring, it's really difficult to plan because you don't know what's actually going to happen in the future. And so that's why risk-taking, uncertainty, when you're risk-taking and you're dealing with uncertainty, what you can actually do is search for value rather than plan and execute. All right, so let's move on with our presentation here. So the thing that distinguishes exploring the future and exploiting current success is uncertainty. When you're running your core institutions the way you've always done it, the work is predictable and you can plan and execute. But when you're exploring, it's unpredictable what will work. And so you have to test and iterate. That's the only way you can actually do the work. And then when you're making investments in these projects that you're working on to explore the future versus projects that are within the way you work already, when you can make large bets because this is a predictable environment, you can have predictable results and you can plan these results. But when you're exploring the future, you have to make small initial bets. And you make these initial bets to test, and then you only increase investments based on evidence. And then in terms of questions, when you're running the core part of your work, you can talk about being on time and on budget and everything being planned. Whereas when you're talking about exploring, the real question is, what did you learn? That is real question when you're running explore projects. What did you learn? How close are we to finding something that actually works? That's a really important way to frame the conversation. So these are 2 different worlds. And what we want, if you're going to be an ambidextrous organization, what we need is for you to build world-class practices here that are different from the world-class practices that you have over here. Right? So I'm going to dive deeper now a little bit to say, okay, so what are the world-class practices over this side? But one way to visually represent, explore, and exploit is actually to see the journey of an innovation project. Right? At the beginning, it's quite messy. You don't know what's going to work. It's a kind of a thread here that's kind of like tangled up. Sometimes something works, then it doesn't work, et cetera, and then you do searching. And then over time, when you figure out that something is going to work, it moves to exploit, which is why over on this side of the world, you can plan and execute. But over this side of the world, you have to first search. You have to first come out of this crazy mess before you can start executing. This mindset is important for anybody doing this work to understand exactly what they're working on and what they're doing. Okay, so then the question becomes, how do we do the messy part of this? How do we do that in a way that's actually strategic? Well, the way to do it is to not just focus on cool technologies. Don't get caught up in technology and invention and things like that. You really have to think about creating value for your stakeholders. And as you think about creating value for your stakeholders, you have to focus on making sure that you're having impact, not just working on cool things, but making sure you're delivering value and having impact with what we call mission models, which is something that I will describe shortly. So that crazy sort of model that I showed you before, and I put explore and exploit on one side, you can also represent it as the journey from having a really great idea to actually delivering impact in the organizations in which you're actually working. And so on this journey, what you want to do is to do searching and find value over here before you start executing. There's a really great book you might want to look at. It's called Nail It, Then Scale It. So you nail it here, and then you scale it over here. But don't scale it before you nail it. So that's really important in the way that you need to think about the ways of doing work here. So the first thing that I said this before, you have to recognize that having a cool technology is not the same thing as having a great value proposition. You can have cool technologies that create no value. There's a lot of exciting technologies out there, virtual reality, AI, a whole bunch of things that are interesting. But we have to make sure that the applications we create on the basis of this technology are actually creating products and services that people actually want, right? That's really, really important. Now, here's a fun thing that people don't sometimes realize. It is also impossible, actually, to make things that delight stakeholders, things that stakeholders find fun to use and fun to do, things that make their lives easier, et cetera, and you can deliver these services, but still fail. And the reason that you fail is because you haven't thought about the entire value chain. You haven't thought clearly about the model that you're going to use to deliver these services. So the question is, how do you actually do it in a sustainable way and a scalable way? How do you create, deliver, and measure impact as you put it out into the world? And this takes us to what we might refer to as mission models. Now, mission models are based off of something we call the business model canvas, which was created by Dr. Alex Osterwalder. And the business model canvas has 9 blocks. And we use this when we're working with companies that have a commercial purpose. And in the 9 blocks, the 2 most important blocks are the value proposition, which is the value you want to create, and who you're planning to create it for. Which customer segments are you planning to deliver that value for? Then the question becomes, well, how do the customers receive that value? What are the relationships you're going to create with the customers? And what are the channels that the customers are going to use to access that value? Which leads to another question, which is, how do the customers bring value back to your organization? Right? So this is the front stage of the business model. These are the things that the customers get to see. In the backstage of the business model, the question is, how do we create that value? Right? So what are the key activities we need to be good at in order to create the value? What are the resources we need to create the value? And then also, who are the key partners we need to work with to create that value? And then all of this together represents our cost structure. And so this is what we mean in the business world when we say it's possible to make stuff that customers like, and still fail, because perhaps the cost of creating the value is much more than the value you're going to get back. So that's why you have to be thinking about the entire value chain, or what we call the entire business model of the value that you're about to create. So how does this apply to your context? Well, folks that have been working in your context for the last few years in government organizations, in the military, in NGOs, they invented a different version of the business model canvas that they call the mission model canvas. And on the mission model canvas, we replace customer segments with beneficiaries. So it's not people who buy, but those people we're creating value for. Who are the beneficiaries of the value that we're trying to create? And instead of channels, we talk about deployment. Not how we sell, but how we ensure that our beneficiaries, we get widespread use amongst our beneficiaries. How do we deploy this value to make sure that all our beneficiaries get it? Instead of customer relationships, it's not about business development now. We're talking about buy-in and support. So how do we get our beneficiaries to become committed users that use our services so that we can create the impact that we want? And in terms of revenue streams, it's not really revenue now. We want to see whether we're achieving our mission and whether we're actually having impact. What are the impact? Not generating revenues, but creating impact. And all of these together create this tool that we call the mission model canvas, and you can start to map and design your mission model. So rather than just think about the service you want to create and who the people are, you can then start to think about, well, how do we create it? Who do we need to partner with someone? What is the cost of the mission? Or the value that we're about to create? How do we get buy-in? How do we deploy? And how do we measure impact? These are things that really, really matter. And it forces us to focus on delivering value. So the reason why this matters, by the way, is that, a lot of organizations that I work with tend to think about the service they want to create, work on that, create the app, and then only later start to think about the mission model, right? But what we really want you to be doing is thinking about both, because how you plan to deliver the service impacts the design of the service. So you have to be thinking about these things at the same time. It is innovation best practice, So this is really, 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 really critical way to think about these things. You don't want to just focus on working on the things that interest you. You want to make sure that they're actually having the impact. And the reason why this matters is because there's a distinction between innovation and creativity. There's a distinction between invention and innovation. Innovation and invention are different. We say something has succeeded as an innovation only when it has had the impact or it has created the value that we intended it to create. If it doesn't create the value that we intended it to create, then it's not a successful innovation. It's the same thing as, I don't know whether you've ever heard the saying, the English saying, if a tree falls in a forest and it makes a sound, but nobody's there to hear it, does it actually make a sound? And that's the question here. Like, if you invent a cool application or a really great service, but nobody uses it, are you really an innovator? Or are you just somebody who's a creative inventor? So that's a question you have to always ask yourself. That's why you need to combine these, right? It's a very important way to think about how to do great work. So now that we have like a shared understanding of how we want to create great work, then the next question is, well, how do you build an innovation ecosystem or innovation culture that supports this way of working? Because that's our goal. We don't want to just come up with cool stuff. We want to be able to have that cool stuff enter the world and have an impact. It's a way of thinking about it. Well, the way to think about an innovation ecosystem is to think about, to frame it in this way. The things we see when we look at our innovation cultures are the behaviors that people show and the outcomes that they create. That's what we tend to see, right? Behaviors and outcomes. But the question is, what is driving those behaviors and outcomes, right? So what are the enablers and blockers that are producing the behaviors we're seeing and creating the outcomes that we're actually producing? This tool here is a tool called the culture map. And when it comes to innovation, what we've learned is that the enablers for innovation are typically leadership support. You need a lot of leadership support to drive innovation. And so we'll have a quick conversation about how do you lead innovation. Another enabler of a really great innovation ecosystem is having a great organizational design. And here we typically talk about how people who are working on innovation collaborate with other functions within your organization. So how do you drive collaboration? And then finally, we talk about having great innovation practices and tools. And the question is, how do you develop really great innovation tools, right? These are fundamental things. And so I'll dive briefly into each one of these so that we can really see how we build a great innovation ecosystem. Let's start with how to lead innovation. Remember, I said that one of the biggest mistakes that organizations make is to use their practices for running their core business or running their core institutions and apply those to innovation. So for example, leaders are asking about whether the project is on time and on budget. But when you're driving innovation, you're in a world of uncertainty. So the question is not whether something is on time and on budget. The real question that matters is, how close are we to finding mission models that work? Right? How close is this team to finding mission models that work? And then what you really need to think about then in that case is to ask the right questions at the right time. So what do we mean by that? So in the UK Research Institute, they have a group of leaders that they've created, or an agency that they've created called the UK Innovation Agency, which is a government agency that helps businesses grow through development and commercialization of new products, processes, and services. And this is how they describe what they do. They want to support, innovation using outstanding ecosystems that are agile. And to lead this or to drive this process, they've created something they call the Innovate UK Council, which is it's a really great kind of body because it's diverse. It's got members from across different areas, which is really what you want if you're a government institution trying to drive innovation. You need a space where decisions are actually being made. So members with a range of expertise, they also have different characteristics and professional backgrounds. So I went and looked at their minutes as I was preparing for this for this talk, and I was a little bit disappointed to find out that they don't really focus on the individual innovation projects to see what progress they're making. Most of their work is really about just setting strategic direction, and then they leave the teams to do whatever work they want. What I would recommend to you is when you set up these institutions to start leading innovation, really focus on driving ideas from just being ideas to actually having impact. And how do you do this? Well, there's a methodology here that we've developed in the work that we do. And this is the methodology for how innovation projects actually succeed. In the first instance, what we want to do is to have our teams design like they're right. So we ask teams to design like they're right. That's a fundamental process because we want to design and then test. So when we're doing design, we want to design like we're right. We want to generate really great ideas. We then want to create beautiful prototypes. And then we want to assess these prototypes. And when we're assessing these prototypes, we're assessing them for breakthrough innovation. Okay, how breakthrough is the innovation? How creative are these ideas? And if we're not happy with it, we force it to go back to design. So you can stay in the design loop until you're happy with the breakthrough nature of the designs that you've created. Now, once you're happy with the designs that you've created, the next phase is we want you to test like you're wrong. So you design like you're right, but then you test like you're wrong. And when you're testing like you're wrong, you generate your hypotheses, assumptions, what needs to be true for our idea to work. And then you run experiments to test your ideas and the things you learn. And you can see that at the center of everything is your mission model. You use that to iterate your mission model. Maybe you learn that something doesn't work, so you have to go back to design, and then you come back like that. So the teams that we're leading have to be using this way of working in order to actually drive value. Design like you're right and test like you're wrong. It's a principle for driving great innovation behaviors. Now, when you're leading in innovation, when you're actually the leader of the innovation from an ecosystem standpoint, the thing that you should be paying attention to is not whether or not the team is on time and on budget and executing against the roadmap. What you really need to be focused on is, in the work that the teams are doing, are they reducing the risk of failure? The results that they're producing in the experiments and the testing that they're doing, remember we said nail it, then scale it, as they're trying to sort of figure out their mission model, are they actually reducing risk? Are they running experiments and testing their ideas to reduce risk? So what I mean by experiments is, for example, before you launch the service, you go and talk to customers or talk to stakeholders to find out what the needs are, so you can design the application based on the needs. You then do some testing to figure out the channel to make sure you're deploying it using the right channels. You make sure that you're having an impact and you are actually measuring that impact. And as you do that work and you're reducing the risk, that individual innovation becomes far more likely to actually become successful. So this is a fundamental way of actually approaching and leading in innovation. So rather than asking whether a project is on time and on budget, what you're really going to ask is, are we on track to finding a mission model that works? That's the right question at the right time for driving innovation. And what we know from best practices is that it is not the amount of work that a team does that leads to success, but it's actually the amount of risk that they reduce, right? It's the amount of risk that they reduce, which means we're really looking for the amount of evidence that a team has to support that their idea is viable. We're also looking for the strength of that evidence. How strong is the evidence that the team has to support that their idea is viable? So this is fundamental in how we actually think about how we do this kind of work. So one of the practices that we want organizations to do is, as the team is doing the work to reduce their risk, we manage the way we invest in a similar fashion. So we make small bets at the beginning and then have those bets increase in size only after the project, we are confident that the project is actually going to succeed. And let me give you a practical example, because somebody has been asking for practical example here. About 5-6 years ago, I was doing work with the British Museum, which is a museum in London. And so we were trying to figure out how they can deliver some of their exhibitions in a way that drives more impact with their customers and in a way that drives more value for their customers. So what they had was a particular style of doing exhibitions, and what they wanted to do actually was to bring the exhibitions out to the public, with the public not having to come to the museum. So they wanted to do these exhibitions as almost like things you can go to the movie theater to watch, right? So that's the idea that they had. Okay, so that's a breakthrough idea. That's a very, very clever breakthrough idea. But that breakthrough idea has questions, which is, would people even do this, right? Like, what is the value here? Who is the value for? Who is the people who are going to do this? How do you deliver this service? What does it even look like to do an exhibition in a movie theater? Okay, so this is a high-risk project. It's a high-risk service, if you want to think about it. So before we start executing and building the whole thing, we have to start testing first with the stakeholders, right? Who are the people that are going to be curating the exhibition? Who are the academics? Who are the universities that are going to be involved? How are they going to do it? And so you start by making small investments, small bets, right? And these small initial bets are to start testing these questions by having these conversations and running these experiments. And as you move along this chain, as you learn more and more and you gain more confidence that this project might actually work, you increase your level of investment in the project until you get to such a point where you say, actually, you know what? In the pilot that we ran, we had 20 people or 200 people buy tickets for the exhibition. So now we feel confident enough that we've de-risked the idea, and now we can make a big bet on the idea, right? So innovation leadership is not about making big bets at the beginning and then tracking whether the project is on time and on budget. It's about making small bets and tracking whether or not the project is on track to delivering value. That's a different style of leading in innovation. So when you're leading innovation and you're having conversations, here are some examples of the right questions that you can ask. And this was a list that I created for an innovation board in an institution that was asking, what is our true north? What kinds of questions should we be asking Tendayi, right? And so I created this template for them. So for example, one question could be, is this project aligned to our strategic goals? Another example could be, is the team describing the mission model in the way that we understand, and do we need more? Another one is, how breakthrough is the mission model? or is the team sticking to models that we already use? Has the team identified the right things to test, or are they missing something important? Will the testing that they're going to do on this mission model, is it going to produce the kind of evidence that allows us to make great decisions? And do we have a team that's committed to driving the project forward? And has the team made a reasonable request in terms of budget and resources, given where they are on the innovation journey? Are they asking for too much resource, well, when there's still a lot of risk, or are they asking for the right resource in order to test their idea? And then finally, what are we committing to do as leaders so we can support these teams in going forward in their next steps? Right question, right time. Not, is this on time? Is this on budget? Etc. etc. I see a lot of people that have got their hands up. Can I ask to just give me like 10 more minutes, and then we'll have like a full Q&A where you can ask all the questions that you have. All right. So the third part of our ecosystem is, how do you drive collaboration? This is the second part of our ecosystem. Here we're learning that no one department can drive innovation, right? Support from other departments is actually key for driving innovation. And so what you want is to give innovation legitimacy and power, so you can really create policies that allow for collaboration across different departments. This is a quote from Joe Gertner, who wrote a book on the IT lab that was set up by AT&T in America. It was called Bell Labs. And this book is a really great book. It's called The Idea Factory. I would recommend that a lot of people get it. And he basically argues that almost by definition, a single person or even a single group could not alone create an innovation. It's impossible, right? The task is too variegated and involved. There's too many things that have to go right, too many departments and other divisions and other decision makers that have to look at the innovation before it goes out into the world and becomes successful. And so the question for your organizations is, how difficult is it for an innovator with a really great idea to navigate all the challenges and politics of working across various departments? And we coined this term, or I coined this term, the hero innovator, when we were working with the Swiss Agency for Development in Switzerland, which is a government agency which is a nonprofit agency that works in the nonprofit world. And what we discovered when we were working with them was that for a person to work on an innovation, it takes a long time. Like, they have to get so much buy-in from so many different stakeholders that it's virtually impossible. There's so many hurdles that they have to jump over that by the time they get to actually start working on the project, it's a really long time. And so it's a really, really big challenge. You have to be brave to do innovation in an organization. And what we're saying to organizations is, don't create an environment where people have to be brave to be innovators. Make an environment where it's easy and it's celebrated to be innovators. And the way to do that is to really try and create collaboration. So what I would like to ask you now is to go back to Menti again. So we're going to go do a quick Menti poll. And the question we have on the Menti poll is, what is the major obstacle to government departments working together on innovation, like in your experience? And what I've done is, and I'm going to go to the Menti now. I can move this forward. What I've done is I've put some options for you that you can choose. So people, finance, leadership, mindsets, time, skills. So to your mind, which one of these is one of the major obstacles? Here you get a chance to choose only one option. Is a major obstacle to government departments working together on innovation in your experience? See people coming on now. Mindset is in the lead. With leadership trailing. Thank you for participating. It's great to see when people are engaging with the polls. I can see everyone's typing mindset. You answer by going to menti.com and putting in the code that's up there, 54522091. Or you can type here as well. You can type your responses into chat. So mindset seems to be in the lead. Some people are also mentioning skills, and so that's an interesting one around mindset, right? It's what do people know, right? And what assumptions are they bringing? Because it's difficult to drive innovation if you have colleagues that are also not thinking about innovation in the right way. Okay, great. Thank you for that. So we'll take mindset as the biggest challenge that we're facing when we're working in these sort of divisions across trying to do interdepartmental work with innovation. So when I'm working with large organizations, one of the hardest departments to work with is procurement, legal and compliance. And so what I do is I run these workshops where we bring in colleagues from legal and compliance, and we put them together with the innovation teams. And we ask the colleagues from legal and compliance to think about how they can support innovation from a practical standpoint. But before we even think about how they can support innovation, we take a list of all the conditions they have. So before we release this application to the public so that they can start to use it, here are all the various conditions that we need to meet from a legal and compliance standpoint. And so we put each condition on a separate Post-it note, a separate sticky note. So we first put all these conditions down, so we were all aligned on like what are the conditions for releasing products and services to members of the public. And then we start working on shifting mindsets, exactly what everybody is actually talking about here, which is a really powerful thing. We show them how world-class innovation practices work. So we tell them that we have an innovation model where we start off by running discovery experiments to test whether there's a real customer need. So here, we're focusing on customer or stakeholder needs, right? And then after that, we might build small prototypes and then start testing those prototypes to see whether or not those prototypes are creating value. When we're satisfied that we have a real stakeholder need and our service is going to create value, we then accelerate and scale that service to everybody else. So once they understand that this is the innovation process, the question we then ask them is, okay, so if all we're trying to do is to do discovery of customer needs, which one of these conditions do we have to actually meet? And what you discover is that they say, actually, the only condition you have to meet are these three conditions. You don't have to meet everything. If you meet these three conditions, you can start running your discovery experiment. What about when we're building small prototypes and we just want to test whether we're creating value? Well, in addition to these three conditions, you only have to meet these other three. And then when we get to scale, we then need to meet these two conditions. And so what we've co-created here is a clear collaboration policy between this department and the innovation teams. As a matter of fact, you could even think about it as a fast track for innovation. And so it's really important that we spend a lot of time within our organizations, building relationships, or as Hobie Darling calls it, lighting up the cannons, because we know that in a large organization, when they go off with a big bang. That's the value of being in a great institution like the government of Dubai. Okay, so last thing for the final 2 minutes before we move to questions. How do you develop innovation skills? And so you need to use the right tools for innovation. And I believe that every organization that wants to drive innovation has to develop world-class coaching. That has to be part of your ecosystem. And then you need to give teams time and resource. And so in terms of innovation tools, there's a lot of great design tools out there in the world that allow you to develop strategy, map your portfolio, design your culture. But when you're working on your ideas, you can also use tools like I showed you before, you can use tools such as the mission model canvas here, right? You can also use tools that allow you to map your environment. You can use tools that allow you to create value propositions. And then finally, you can also have tools for testing and tracking the progress that your teams are making. And these can be tools around metrics, test cards and learning cards. So the question is, are you using the right tools? Or do teams in your organizations have to always use traditional tools when they're trying to do innovation, when those tools are not fit for purpose? So using the right tools really, really matters. And then I'm a big advocate of innovation coaching, because not everyone has the time to develop the right skills. But if you have experts in your organization who have knowledge in innovation and are also keenly interested in teaching others, then you can really drive innovation practices within your organization. And so there's one last task that I have for you all. Here are some characteristics of coaching, of what makes a good coach. So being able to throw diplomatic hand grenades, having expertise in innovation tools, letting people do whatever they want. Will they be able to give inspirational speeches? They don't have any interest in innovation best practices. They don't have they need to have world-class facilitation skills. They give teams practical tools, ways forward, showing people in teams how they're wrong, right? Or they're being polite, or do they challenge preconceived notions? Do they ask the right questions at the right time, or do they tell people what to do? So here are 12 characteristics that a world-class innovation coach can have. Now, 6 of these are wrong and 6 of these are right. And so what I need you to do is to look at these and think which of these are the right skills for an innovation coach to have. And all you have to do is to type the number sequence into chat. That's all you have to do, is to type the number sequence into chat, and I'll give you a minute to do that. Just 1 minute to type the right number sequence into chat. Which of these are the right skills for an innovation coach to have? We need 6, Dr. Sarah. 6 numbers. 1, 6, 10. Somebody said 11. 7 for sure. 2, 6, 2, 4, 6, 9, 2, 6, 2, 6, 7. All right. Thank you very much for your participation. The minute is up, so let me show you the solution. The right solution is 1, 2, 6, 7, 10, and 11. And so these are the correct answers. So you need to be able to challenge teams and challenge them quite directly. So that's why, but you have to be diplomatic while you're doing it. So that's why we call them diplomatic hand grenades. And then you need to be world-class at expert with tools. You need to be world-class at facilitating. You need to give teams practical ways forward, which is the opposite of inspirational speeches. You don't have to be good at inspirational speeches. In fact, people who are great at speeches are not usually good coaches, such as myself. Challenging preconceived notions is really important, and asking the right questions at the right time versus telling people what to do. So somehow, and you cannot be polite and obsequious and deferring. So what we really want our coaches to be doing is to show teams the mirror without fear, which means you need to be challenging. Then you need to get the teams to produce world-class innovation without telling them what to do. You need to inspire them to take bold directions. And then you have to do this without blah, blah, blah. You have to be practical. You have to give them practical tools. And so, there's a great group of an organization in the UK called Set Squared that I've worked with. They invest in startups through government agencies and universities, and they've worked with us to really develop world-class coaches, and then those coaches coach those startups. And this is something you might think about doing within your organization yourself. So just to wrap up here, what's a great innovation ecosystem? Well, it's one where we have leaders that ask the right questions at the right time, we have the right organizational design, and we have really great innovation practices that are driven by great innovation coaching. So now what? What can you take away from this, and what can you do on day one? What I would do is, and the way we work with organizations is, We help them assess their level of innovation maturity, like how mature is your innovation culture? Do you have the right systems and processes in place? And then benchmark some of your innovation projects in terms of, are they really achieving the value or having the impact that we say that they would have? Maybe develop a framework for making incremental investments in projects. Maybe create an innovation board or an innovation council for making evidence-based decisions. Create policies for cross-functional collaboration for sure, and develop a set of world-class innovation coaches. That is definitely something that I would recommend for you. So thank you very much. I look forward to receiving your questions. I have no place to go, so we can take as much time as you need, and I'll answer every question that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tendayi Viki, for this really engaging lecture and all of these inputs that we are having from all the participants. You took us through a really innovative ecosystem of how we can really tackle what we can do in our organizations and how we can move it forward. I do see some hands raised, so if somebody would like to open their mic, introduce themselves and their organizations, and start with their questioning. So the first person that comes to mind is Mr. Adnan Bashir. If you'd like to open your mic. I guess by the time Mr. Adnan would be ready to really think about the question and join us, I did have a question, if you don't mind, that we can go to the mission map, which was a really interesting mission map. If we can go through that briefly, because it has 9 pillars, and how the right side or that cycle can be sometimes helpful in the decision to get to the rightful impact for our organization.
Okay, so I will share my screen. You can see the mission model? All right, perfect. Yes. Yeah, so here, the reason why we say focus on this, right, is because what we want people to be doing is thinking about the impact that their innovations are going to have. Because what we tend to do, especially in government organizations, we measure success by something being launched. So did we successfully launch the service? Did we successfully launch the application? Is it out in the world? We don't measure success by the impact that the thing that we've launched is having in the world, right? People get to, oh yeah, we've just launched. There's even like events where you cut ribbons and people show up and they're celebrating the launch. But actually, we measure success in innovation only by the impact that it's actually having. So we want to force teams that are working on these projects to think and measure impact from day one. So we want them to be thinking about who are the beneficiaries who are going to gain value from this, and what is the value that they're going to get. Okay. And so that's what this canvas helps you think. So you can start to map and think about this. So this part of the canvas that we're mapping here, we call this the front stage of the canvas, because this is what your beneficiaries get to experience. You need their buy-in and their support, and you need to figure out ways to deploy this value to them. So that's what they get to experience. And then, of course, with that, you get to create the impact that you've been trying to create. So that's what they get to experience. Now, in the back stage of this, you need to figure out how you can, in a sustained way, continuously create and deliver this value. What are the activities you need to be good at? Do you need partners? Do you need resources? And of course, how much is all of that going to cost? And we call this part the backstage of the mission model. And it is the job of the innovator to answer all 9 questions. The innovation team should have an answer to all 9 questions. They shouldn't just focus on building the application or the service or building the technology. That way, we understand that we can co-create the value. And as leaders, we should be demanding this from the teams, rather than just giving them money because something looks good and then we see if it's on time and on budget.
which is a really great idea of how to think and really to demand the right answers to be delivered to the teams. And from the questions that we got in the chat box is the linkage between the business canvas or the business model, which there are some certain changes, which is the buy-in, the beneficiaries, and the impact factor that you have really highlighted. So the questions are more towards how we can collaborate and link, because many of our organizations are still at the adoption of the business canvas as the canvas to for the sake of innovation, and how are the canvas can support us with the collaboration part. So these are two questions. I know we have only 5 minutes, but these are great questions to really drive the innovation in our organization. And thanks for everyone who have contributed in the chat box.
Okay, cool. No, thank you everyone for contributing to the question. So if you're adopting the business model canvas, the original business model canvas, and you're using this in a government organization, the challenge that, and I've done this before, you get to the box that says revenue, and you don't know what to put in. You're like, well, we're not really making any money from this. We're just deploying it for people to use and create value for their lives. So that's the relationship between, it's when you get to this moment where you're like, they're not really customers, they're not really paying us for it. Unless you are working on something where the government is collecting revenue from people, then you can use the business model canvas. But if you're not working on something where you're collecting revenue from people, then you have to replace the revenue question with the question of impact. And that's the relationship between the business model canvas and the mission model canvas. The mission model canvas is more appropriate for services in which you don't gather revenue, but you're focused on creating value. Now, how does this drive impact? Well, or how does it drive collaboration? If you decide that your job is not simply to make an application, right, or deliver some sort of service, if you decide that your job is to figure out the whole mission model, it forces you to work with other people, because it's not going to be just you that's responsible for deploying, for example. It's not going to be just you that's responsible for driving buy-in and support. It's not going to be you that's responsible for procuring the right developers to develop the application, right? There's so many other people you have to work with. So the moment you start focusing on the entire mission, it forces you to collaborate, because the question then becomes, what are all the things that you have to do in order to make the mission model successful? Then you're like, oh man, yeah, I have to go talk to the IT people so that they can give me access to the shared service so I can build the application. Oh yeah, I have to talk to the revenue collection agency so they can give me create a system for us to have the people pay when they get their driver's licenses. Oh yes, I have to talk to the person who actually runs the border services to see whether or not they're willing to put this particular thing on their computers. All of these things are conversations that you have to have, and you drive collaboration through the mission model. And if you can show them the mission model and show them the part they play in the innovation, to say, you're a key partner who's helping us create this aspect of the value so we can deploy it this way for this beneficiary, now you're starting to have conversations that really allow you to collaborate effectively.
That's a really good way of really capturing that this business or the mission model, where you mentioned that the bottom two parts, which is the cost on one side and the revenue. If you look at the impact and really track how the impact can really benefit more than one individual, this will really help with collaborating and seeing what is beneficiary to many people. There's one question that we have received too, and we'd like to have your quick answer on it, because we do have 2 minutes to run. So as mentioned, that there is an importance of building an internal ecosystem to nurture and harness innovation. From your own experience, what are the priorities that we have to focus initially on building an ecosystem for our government entities, which can maximize our benefit from innovation?
Yeah, I think right now I would focus on building the right skills, right? Building the right skills, making sure that maybe we have really a great number of coaches that can really coach these methodologies, designing the right framework for driving these innovation practices. Because what that does is that as people learn new ways of working, they start creating challenges in the institutions that they work. And then with those challenges, you can start to transform those institutions. But before people know what they want to accomplish, it's really hard to drive change. So I think the first move you can make is really understanding this difference between exploring the future and running the core business, designing mission models, testing, experimenting, iterating. As people build this level of skill and knowledge, then they can start to say, okay, well, I'm trying to do this, but I can't do it because of this reason. And then you can start to tackle that reason as you actually go forward.
That's great. And one more question, just to wrap it up. What is the way that we can really get over the mindset block that we have displayed in our Menti exercise that you have showed? That's your final comments for our webinar.
Yeah, so there's two ways to deal with mindsets, right? One is what you're doing here. You have sessions, you have conversations, and you talk, and you challenge each other, and you have all of these conversations. So one way to challenge mindsets is to have a conversation. The hardest thing, though, about mindsets is then changing behavior. So you can have conversations, and people can actually agree with you. There's a lot to agree with when you think about innovation. The question is, well, how do I then behave in a way that's aligned to my mindset? And that's about tools. You have to give people the right tools to do the work. So if I'm working on an innovation and you give me a 35-page business case to write, rather than a mission model canvas to complete, you're giving me the wrong tool, because that tool is an expression of a different mindset to the one that I'm trying to actually show. So you have to choose the right tools. And then the combination of the conversation and the tools becomes aligned, and now you can see the things and the practical things you want to see within your organization.
We'd like to really thank you, Dr. Tendayi Viki, for this really presentation and for really giving us the tools and really displaying how we can build an effective innovation ecosystem to drive world-class innovation. Thank you again, Dr. Tendayi Viki, for being with us today. Thank you, everyone, for attending, participating, and sharing your comments. It was my pleasure being with you here today. Please keep your eyes on future IPP webinars, and from Dubai and from our beautiful city of Dubai, please go ahead and go be a game changer innovation. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time in a beautiful webinar where innovation precedes everything that we do in our organizations. Thank you, everyone, and have a blessed day.